You need cooling, baby, I'm not fooling. I'm gonna send you back to schooling.
Good morning. Welcome in. We are the Out of Bounds Show, ESPN 1059 The Zone. We're live in the BankPlus Studio. And we're streaming live on thezone1059.com and the Out of Bounds radio app. We've got Tim Brando, longtime broadcaster, ESPN, CBS, Fox. He's been in sports talk radio. Right when I started in sports talk radio, Timmy B was on Sporting News Radio from, I think, 9 a.m. to noon. And I would listen religiously, but everybody in the SEC knows him because he's called football, basketball, baseball, and here, and then, of course, national games and so on with Fox now. From Shreveport, Louisiana, Tim Brando on the Out of Bounds Show on the Farm Bureau Insurance Guest Line. Timmy B, good morning. How you doing?
I'm good, Bo. It's great to be with you. How are you?
I'm great. You doing well?
Yeah, just basketball Jones. I'm flying around the country doing college basketball now. I didn't have a game this week during the week, but generally I do. So I got a little bit of a respite. Didn't have to fight the airport terminal or the weather gods, which have been, and of course the weather was better this week than it's been in the last 2 or 3 weeks. So I got a little better weather week when I was at home, which is okay. I'll take it. But I leave tomorrow for Cincinnati. I've got Xavier and Creighton on Saturday on Fox at 2 o'clock Central, 3 Eastern, and next week I'll be heading back to the Big East and doing another game involving UConn, the nation's #1 team. I've been doing a lot of UConn and Purdue in the Big Ten and the Big East, so following a lot of the best teams in the country. So it's always fun this time of year, and of course I'll culminate my season at the Big East tournament, and then I'll be chasing grandbabies and golf balls. So,
love it. All right, what do you like which sport do you like to do better, football or basketball, Timmy B?
Neither. It's a tie. I know it bugs people when I say that, but it's true. I love being on. I love what I do, and it doesn't really matter the sport or the teams. I just love calling live sports television. I would work other sports if I wanted to travel year-round, but I don't anymore. I really prefer the sports that I'm most passionate about, and that's college football and college basketball. And so in the spring and summer, I choose to stay home, recharge my battery, and be enthusiastic when, toe meets leather in September or late August. So I've been doing that really pretty much since I left CBS and left my radio show. I worked round the clock and through the calendar for, the better part of 35 years, and this particular year is my 39th nationally. I started at ESPN in 1985 while I was still working in Baton Rouge on local television, and I moved to Connecticut in December of '86. I'm contracted to work all the way through 26, so that'll get me to my 40th year. In 2025 will be my 40th anniversary of national television.
Wow!
And I've been calling ball games since 1971 when I was an eighth grader. So in the eighth grade, I began calling high school football with my dad. So that's 53 years I've been doing it, football, either on Friday or Saturday. So in one capacity or another. So I'm loving life, and as I said, I'm very proud of my grandchildren. I've got two that are in the Mississippi area over at UMC. My son-in-law is a resident in plastic surgery, and so I come over to Madison many, many times to see my daughter and my daughter Tara and my son John Sullivan. So we've got two grandbabies there, and we've got two here in Shreveport. So between the ages of 3 and 7. So Big Daddy B likes to be with his kids and his wife a little bit more in the spring and summer.
That's great, man. Tim Brando on the Out of Bounds show in the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. This is ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Timmy B, I remember when you would come through, I think I've got this right, in the 80s, and call college baseball at Dudy Noble Field right after Raffy and Will had left Mississippi State, and ESPN was doing some games here and there. Do I have that right?
Oh yeah. If you watch the documentary that they did on the 30 for 30 series, Thunder and Lightning, I'm all over it. Yeah. And we were doing those games at Dudy Noble behind the backstop. They didn't have a press box back then. That's true. Absolutely true. And Sunday night college baseball was a staple. We also, just to be fair and make sure that Ole Miss gets taken care of, Tim McGraw's dad, Tug, and I did the first college baseball game ever played at Swayze when they built that in 1990, the 89-90 season, I think it was, maybe the 89, summer of 89 maybe. Kentucky played Ole Miss. Don Kessinger's son was playing at that time. This was before Kessinger was coaching, but his son was on that team. Keith, I believe was his name. And I remember doing that game with Tugger. And his son, Tim, who was going to Northeast, which is where I went to school before it became ULM, he drove over with some cassette tapes to play for his father that he had only met one other time. The second time he ever saw his dad, because he didn't know until he was up in years who his dad was. He lived over in outside the Rayville area, and he drove over with his cassette tapes, and he played them for us. And Tug said, "What do you think of my kid?" I said, I think he should leave school and go to Nashville right now." That's a true story as well.
That's unbelievable. Okay.
Yeah. Tug was working in Philadelphia where he had
Phillies.
He retired as a baseball player with the Phillies. Yeah. And, they had won the 1980 World Series when Pete Rose had come over. And he was doing a sportscasting gig there. And the programming head at ESPN at that time, a gentleman by the name of Lauren Matthews, was auditioning guys to become broadcasters for Major League Baseball when it came to ESPN, which was the following year, the 90-91 year. And so I was basically doing an on-air audition for Tug, doing that Ole Miss Kentucky game that day. And we had a blast. It was a lot of fun. I remember Langston Rogers took us to Old Taylor Grocery. Tug was telling a bunch of stories, and it was a blast. And Tim was with us. And who knew that Tim would later become, an international country and sensation. But that's a wild story. When he did the movie, and you said you religiously listened to my show, when he did the movie Blindside, playing the role of another Mississippi guy I knew pretty well, Sean Toohey. I covered Sean when I started doing LSU games in 81 and 82 on Tiger Vision while I was working in Baton Rouge. So he came on, we booked him to be on my show. And at that time, we were simulcasting the Brando show. It was also on CBS Sports Network. It was being done on cable television. Sort of similar to what Feinbaum does now with SEC Network, with his show being on both radio and TV. So they booked him to be on my show, and he was doing this rotary thing where he was going to do like 25, 30 shows in a day, moving from market to market and doing a few national shows too. And I'll never forget when Tim came on with me, I said, Tim, when you saw my name in my show, when you were about to come on today, what did you think of? And he said, Ole Miss. And so that was his answer.
That's great.
He knew right away he was talking to Tim Brando, who worked with his dad and who went to dinner at Old Taylor Grocery with his dad before he had made it big and before he'd moved from Rayville.
Wow, Tim Brando. Longtime TV broadcaster, host, sports talk radio. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line, obviously tied to the SEC and LSU. We got to talk Chris Jackson for a minute, Timmy B.
Yeah, sure.
I was in junior high school when he was playing. I went to almost all the games at Humphrey Coliseum. Dale Brown and Richard Williams would get after it. Dale had more talent, but Richard was a hell of a coach too.
Yeah.
And they had some great matchups. Broke my heart when Chris Jackson picked LSU over Mississippi State, but I still loved him. Do you remember the first time you ever saw Chris Jackson play hoops, Timmy B?
Yeah, absolutely. And I called, as you know, several of his games. Larry Conley and I did a game with him at Kentucky. We did an incredible game that was I wish I'd done the game at Ole Miss. You remember that incredible matchup that he had, and I'm trying to remember.
Gerald Glass.
Gerald Glass. They put on a show in that game. I did not have that game, but I remember watching it. He made some huge shots to beat Kentucky at Kentucky, and we had Dale mic'd up for that game. I did his games at Arkansas, and that was, I mean, when Nolan had it rolling with that great team of his with Day and Mayberry, and then later, of course, the Final Four team with Carlos Williamson and those guys. But yeah, Chris was sort of the modern day version of Pete Maravich. He was doing things on the floor that had not been done on an SEC floor since Maravich played. Pete was different because it was at a different time and there was really no one like him. But he was magical not only in making shots, but also in passing the ball, making incredible behind the back passes in transition. Chris did all those things. And the one thing I remember is that a lot of times his teammates just were not ready for the passes they were going to get. The speed of his game was going far faster than they could realize. Okay. The game really slowed down for him long before he did other people. But the other thing, because of his Tourette syndrome, and I remember this, and I don't believe people understand, Dale got a lot of grief in his second season because they lost to Georgia Tech, to Lethal Weapon 3 in a great game in the NCAA tournament. And that wasn't a bad team either. Kenny Anderson, Brian Oliver, Dennis Scott, all 3 first-round draft picks on the first team on that team. But Chris had Shaq and he had Stanley Roberts on his team. And I want to say the final was something like 95 to 94, 93, 92. It was a great game. Georgia Tech wound up winning it and moving on to the Sweet 16 and then on to the Final Four eventually. But when Chris was playing with those guys, he had the Tourette syndrome that he had caused him to say things on the floor. He would get really mad at himself, and it was because he was young and because he was so active. If you read anything about Tourette, you find out that it affects the nervous system in a way that if a kid is really a perfectionist and wants to be great, he gets mad at himself, and he would get really angry on the floor, but with himself. Well, the problem was guys like Stanley and Shaq, they thought he was mad at them. They were young too, and they didn't understand it. And I remember talking with Dale about it in length, and then also from privately talking to Chris about it. It did improve as he got a little bit older, but Tourette's is something that is really very hard for young people to deal with, and especially those that are very active. And God knows there wasn't anyone any more active than Chris Jackson at that time. And I don't know, you've seen him probably recently in the 3-on-3 league.
Yes.
Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf can still play.
Yeah.
He can absolutely still play. And when Dale Brown was honored a couple of years ago, I saw him. He came down when they named the floor of the court after Dale at LSU on January 4th. In 2021. So it's been almost 3 years, 2.5 years maybe. And Chris was there and I got to talk at length with him. He's doing great. And was a rock star, as you can imagine, when he got there to see Dale and be there for those festivities. Because like you, he mesmerized a lot of people. and he's such a nice guy, very, very humble individual. And his story is a unique one, no doubt about it. And I was really honored and privileged to get the call as many of the games as I did of his.
Tim Brando, longtime broadcaster on the Out of Bounds show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. Timmy B, as a kid, I would get to either the SEC tournament games or the Hump an hour before the game just to watch him warm up. And that's how special he was, Timmy B, as you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll give you an example of imagine if Chris had played when Maravich played. I went down to the John Parker Agricultural Center in 1967. I was 11 years old. My father's brother, my uncle, was a public relations guy for Exxon. And he called my dad and he told him, you need to bring Tim down to see this kid, Pistol Pete. And my dad said, okay. So he was already making some headlines. But remember, back then, freshmen were not allowed to play with the varsity. So we go in to the game, watch them warm up. Then they play the game. They were playing Auburn, as I recall. And the place was packed, absolutely packed, the old Ag Center on Highland Road in Baton Rouge. So the game ends. They win by like 3. I think the score was something like 73-70. Pistol Pete had 65 points in the game. So he scored 65 of the 70 points for LSU to win the game. The game ends, the freshman game ends, and the building is unloading. It's like everybody's leaving, and the varsity's about to come out. Well, as a kid, I was accustomed to going to high school games where, the junior varsity, or we used to call them when I was a child in the 60s, we called them the B team. The B team would play first, and then the varsity would come out and play the next game. So I thought, okay, this is just like high school. Some of the guys on the B team will play for the varsity. They just go in, take put on the different uniform, take a quick shower maybe, and they come back out, warm up, and play. So I was fully expecting Maravich to come out and play with the varsity. And I'm like, I looked up at my uncle. I said, Uncle, where's everybody going? And he said, Tim, the show has left the building. I said, what? He said, he's not coming out. I said, Pete's not coming out? He said, no, the freshmen can't play in college for the varsity. And I went, oh, man, what a bummer. I was ready to watch him go again, That's the mind of an 11-year-old at the time, right?
Sure.
So anyway, pretty incredible stuff. And that's the kind of I think we would have watched him play. If he wanted to play 2 or 3 games, we would have watched him. And I think the same was true with Chris. He was just unbelievable. He had a game at Florida that was maybe even better than the game he had at Ole Miss. That I think he went for like 55 or 56 in that game at O'Connell Center that I'll never forget. Norm Sloan was coaching, and he was throwing his arms up. There was no defense. They were running a diamond and 2, a box and 1. He changed defenses. The whole game you just could not stop that kid. And like I said, if he didn't make the basket, he got the assist for the basket. So virtually every point that was scored, he accounted for in some way.
The M&M boys for our listeners, Moten and Maxwell at Florida.
Yeah. That's right.
I got their autographs when I was a kid. Tim Brando, sharing great stories.
Great memory.
Pistol Pete and Chris Jackson, among others. And we were all, even though he was playing, he may not have been playing for your team, LSU, man, was he worth the price of admission. Or, as Timmy B was talking about, he was must-see TV at that time. Which, as Timmy B knows, the ACC dominated at that time. The Big East, we were growing up with, Hoya Paranoia and Boeheim and Lou Carnesecca, and even Patino was at Providence for a minute. And, we weren't really a basketball school, but when you got Barkley and Chuck Person and Moten and Maxwell and Chris Jackson and Shaq, that whole run, it was unbelievable time.
I'll say this, Bo. I think the decade of the '80s was a golden era for college basketball altogether.
Absolutely.
People, I came around, like I said, 1985. was Georgia Tech's first ACC title year, and I was doing the ACC tournament that year for ESPN. Imagine, I'm 29 years old, living out a dream, and I'm at the Army in Atlanta doing, Carolina and NC State in the semifinals, and Georgia Tech and Duke were playing in another semifinal game. I mean, you talk about a thrill. That was absolutely a thrill. And during that time, LSU had challenged Kentucky. I mean, think about the personalities the SEC had as coaches. Hugh Durham had been to a Final Four in '83. That's the team everyone forgets because Louisville and NC State played in that great game, Pi Slamma Jamma, against the Doctors of Dunk. But Georgia was a year removed from having Dominique, and they went to the Final Four the year Dominique left.
Yeah.
And you had Norm Sloan was at Florida. LSU had Daddy Dale. Ole Miss had just gone to its first tournament and won the SEC, I think beating Georgia with Dominique in 1980. The Sean Toohey and John Stroud and those guys were playing in those days. Great players could be found everywhere.
Yes.
And then moving forward, you saw Alabama went to 4 straight Sweet 16s in the decade of the 80s. That team that Wimp had, that Mark Godfrey playing guard with Jimmy Farmer, McDyess, Bobby Lee Hurt was an incredible talent that played at Alabama during the time in which Chuck Person, the rifleman, was playing with Barkley at Auburn. I mean, everybody had great players, and everybody had dynamic, charismatic coaches. Sonny Smith, Wimp Sanderson. CM was at Vanderbilt back then. You had the bomb squad with Scott Drought and all of that talent inside too. They always had big guys that were fantastic players at Vanderbilt, and they went to Sweet 16s in those days. Dale went to 2 Final Fours in '81 with his best team, I think. That '81 team with Howard Hi-C Carter, Ethan Martin, Dwayne Scales, Rudy Macklin, Greg Cook. That was just an awesome basketball team. And unfortunately in the regional finals at the Superdome, Rudy got hurt, messed up his finger, and it affected him in the Final Four in a way that I thought really hurt them against Indiana. Not to make excuses.
Isaiah
but Rudy
Thomas.
was the guy.
Yes.
Isaiah Thomas and that team beat LSU in '81 in the final. That team went 31-5 and was 17-1 in the SEC.
Wow!
Think about that.
Timmy B.
17-1 in the SEC.
I got to take a break. We should have taped this. I hope to get you back on in a couple of months when you're done with college basketball, because we could do some more storytelling. I have loved watching you since I was a kid. Keep up the good work. I'm glad the grandkids are going great and that you're coming over to Madison, Mississippi every now and then. That's where the studio is, and that's where we're broadcasting from right now.
I'd love to see you sometime while I'm there.
I'll buy you lunch or dinner.
Sometime.
Thanks,
Sounds
Timmy
good,
B.
bro. I'd love to do that. You bet.
Tim Brando, longtime broadcaster, national, joining us on the Out of Bounds show, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. That was a treat, and it was driven by your next Ford F-150 truck at Mack Hike Ford, I-55 North in Jackson. Also presented by Two Brothers and the amazing wings, street tacos, and fried cheese at one of the SEC's best bar and grills. We'll be back tomorrow for a Football Friday and some Super Bowl talk. See ya.